Here's my confession. For about 15 years, I had a shelf under my kitchen sink that looked like a chemistry lab. 7-Dust, malathion, 2 different bottles of Roundup. I spent somewhere north of $200 a season on that shelf, and every August, my tomato plants were still being eaten alive. Then my Amish neighbor Daniel asked me what I was spraying. I told him. He didn't laugh. Daniel doesn't laugh at people, but he said one sentence that took me 20 years to really understand. And then he wrote down a recipe on the back of a feed store receipt. 3 ingredients, all of them in your kitchen right now. Total cost $0. Stick with me to the end, because there's also a timing rule Daniel follows that makes the difference between this working and not working. Now, I want to be straight with you about who put that shelf under my kitchen sink. It wasn't me. Not really. It was a pipeline that started right after the Second World War, and it has a name and a date. The name is the post-war pesticide industry. The date is 1947 or so, the year Congress passed the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, FIFRA. That law set up the regulatory pipeline that turned pest control into a branded retail product. Then in 1958, Union Carbide introduced a chemical called Carbaryl. You know it by its brand name, 7. And once 7 was on the market, it started showing up in something most folks have forgotten ever existed, the County Extension Bulletin. Here's how it worked. Your county extension office used to publish little pamphlets every spring telling backyard gardeners what to do about pests. Before the war, those pamphlets had homemade preparations in them: soap, garlic, tobacco water, ash, old recipes that grandmothers in this part of Pennsylvania had been using for 100 years. By the early 1960s, those recipes were gone. The bulletins now recommended 7-Dust by brand name. My father got one of those pamphlets in the 1970s in Lebanon County. I remember the yellow paper. He bought the 7. He told me to dust the tomato plants. I did it for 30 years without ever asking who wrote the pamphlet. The stakes are real. $200 a season is what I was spending under my own sink. Multiply that across 40 million American households that still keep a garden, and you start to see the scale of what got moved from the kitchen to the cash register. The Amish never plugged into that pipeline. Old order communities don't read extension bulletins. They don't subscribe to county newsletters. They pass recipes the way they pass everything else, from a father to a son in the row. And that is exactly why Daniel still had the recipe his grandfather used. It never left his community because the suppression never reached his community. All right, let's get to the recipe. Here it is. The way Daniel wrote it down for me on the back of that feed store receipt: 1 tablespoon of plain liquid dish soap, and this matters, and plain Castile soap like Dr. Bronner's, or basic unscented ivory, not antibacterial. The antibacterial soaps have additives that work against you. Plain soap only. 1 whole bulb of garlic, not a clove, the whole bulb. Peel it, crush it, drop it in a jar with a little water, and let it steep overnight on the counter. Daniel does it before bed. In the morning, the water's yellow and the kitchen smells like a pizzeria. 1 tablespoon of cayenne pepper. The cheap stuff from the grocery aisle is fine. In the morning, you pour the garlic steep, the soap, and the cayenne into 1 gallon of water. You strain the whole mixture through cheesecloth. That part matters too, because any chunk of garlic skin will clog a spray nozzle in about 4 seconds. You pour the strained liquid into a clean spray bottle. That's it. If you already have these 3 things in your kitchen, the cost is $0. If you have to buy them fresh, you're looking at under $3 for the entire season. Compare that to the $200 I was spending, and that's exactly the kind of math that didn't make it into the extension bulletin, because nobody at the county office had any reason to recommend a recipe that didn't generate a retail margin. Now here's where it gets interesting: the mechanism. I asked Daniel one afternoon why the recipe works, and he said one sentence to me that took me 20 years to really understand. He said, "Bill, you're not fighting pests, you're feeding them." I didn't get it at the time. I get it now. Here's what he meant. The soap doesn't poison anything. It dissolves the soft cuticle on the outside of soft-bodied pests, aphids, mites, whiteflies, the little chewers. Their bodies leak out and they die. The garlic releases a sulfur compound called allicin that scrambles the scent receptors pests use to find your plants. They literally lose the plant. And the capsaicin in the cayenne deters the chewing insects from taking a second bite. 3 plain ingredients, 3 plain mechanisms. But here's the part Daniel was driving at. A chemical like 7 doesn't just kill the pest. It kills everything in the garden with a nervous system. Lacewings, ladybugs, parasitic wasps, the predators that eat your pests for a living, and the predators always die first because they're bigger and they're moving around the leaf more. So you spray, the predators die fast, the pests rebound in 2 weeks, and now there's nothing left to eat them. You have, in Daniel's words, fed them. The recipe avoids all of that because soap and garlic and cayenne don't reach the hard-shelled beneficial insects. They walk walk right through it. And that's exactly the kind of distinction that gets stripped out when knowledge moves from a kitchen to a label. All right, let's keep going, because I want to tell you what this actually looked like in my garden across one full season after I switched. My pepper plants were covered in aphids, green ones, the soft kind, hundreds per leaf. I started the recipe in late May. Within 3 weeks, the aphid population had dropped by roughly 80%. Not zero, about 80%. My tomatoes that year thought I'd been losing 6 to 8 plants every summer to hornworms. That year I lost 2. And then about 6 weeks in, I was doing my morning walk with a cup of coffee and I spotted my first lacewing on a tomato leaf. Pale green, lacy wings. I almost called my wife over. Something invisible had shifted in that garden, and that tiny green creature was the proof. I had not had a lacewing in 15 years of spraying 7, and here's the part most people miss. This recipe works better in year 2 than it does in year 1. The first year, you're knocking back the pests. The second year, the beneficials have come back to your garden and they start doing most of the work for you. By the third year, you're barely spraying at all. That's the rebuilding. That's why the bulletin couldn't sell it. There's no quarterly revenue line in a method that has you spraying less every season instead of more. Most American gardeners quit this recipe in week 1 because they expected 7-style instant kill. That's not the mental model. This is a reduction and rebalance approach, not an exterminate approach. Now, if what I'm walking you through here is making sense and you're starting to see how the Amish do this differently than the way most of us were taught, I want to point you to something. The recipe handles the pests that are already in your garden. The next step is keeping them from showing up in the first place. That's companion planting, and it's chapter 3 of my book, The 30-Day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol. It's $17 at backyardbuildbooks.com. Chapter 3 lays out exactly what Daniel plants next to what, and why basil next to tomatoes and dill next to brassicas isn't decoration. It's the second layer of the defense. If you're watching this on your television, there's a QR code on the screen. Grab your phone and point it at that code. Take your time finding the phone. I'll wait right here. If you're already on the phone or the laptop, the link is in the description. This is for the folks who are tired of the chemical treadmill and want a system instead of one more tip, all right? Back to it. So why did this recipe get buried? Follow the money. The U.S. home and garden pesticide market is roughly $3 billion a year. $3 billion. And a homemade 3-ingredient kitchen spray cannot be patented. It cannot be sold at retail margin. It cannot be standardized in a way that fits a chemical company's quarterly report. Those are the 3 reasons it got dropped from the bulletin. Not because it didn't work, because it didn't pay. Now, I'll be fair. The obvious counter-argument is that commercial sprays do work faster in the short term, and for certain commercial-scale operations, they're genuinely harder to replace. I'm not telling a 1,000-acre farm to switch to garlic water. I'm telling you in your backyard, and here's the cost to you personally. Every season, a gardener spends $200 fighting pests as a season. The soil gets weaker, the beneficials die, the cycle deepens, and the chemicals sit on a shelf under the kitchen sink, off-gassing every time you open the cabinet. For me, that was 15 years. 15 years times $200 is $3,000 of my own money, plus weak tomatoes, plus the breathing in. That's what got lost, not abstract harm, that. Now, here's the part that took me 20 years to figure out, and it's what separates the recipe working from the recipe failing. The timing rule. Daniel told me this almost as an afterthought, and he was right that it matters as much as the ingredients. You spray only at dusk, after 7 in the evening in summer when the sun is off the leaves. Never in the morning, never at midday. 2 reasons. First, the soap and oil mixture burns leaves in direct sun. It's called phytotoxicity, and you'll scorch your own plants if you spray them at noon. I learned that one the hard way on a row of pepper plants. Second, the bees and the hoverflies and the other beneficial pollinators are back in their hives by dusk. The soft-bodied pests are the ones still out there feeding at night, so your spray only hits the pests, not the helpers. The second part of the rule is the stopping. Reapply every 7 days for 3 weeks, then stop. If you keep spraying past 3 weeks, you start hitting the beneficial predator population you're trying to build up. That's the rebuilding I was talking about. 3 weeks of intervention, then you let the lacewings and ladybugs take over. This is exactly the kind of granular practitioner knowledge that gets stripped out when a recipe gets reduced to a commercial label or a county pamphlet. The label tells you the dose. It doesn't tell you the hour. Before I let you go, I want to come back to one more thing. Once the recipe is working and the timing is right, the long game is is a garden where the beneficial predators do most of the work for you and you spray less and less every year. That's chapter 6 of the book, Beneficial Insects, Your Garden's Army. It walks you through which predators eat which pests, what plants pull them into your garden, and how to keep them there once they arrive. It's everything Daniel showed me over 35 years, organized into a 30-day protocol. You can start this weekend. BackyardBuildBooks.com. If you're on the TV, the QR code is back on the screen. Go ahead and scan it now. No rush. Take a second to grab the phone if you set it down. I'll be right here. If you're on the phone already, the link's down in the description. So there it is. 3 ingredients: soap, garlic, cayenne, 1 gallon of water, strained through cheesecloth, sprayed only at dusk every 7 days for 3 weeks. Now you have the recipe most American gardeners have never been handed, because the pipeline that handed out the gardening advice stopped handing this one out about 70 years ago. Next time, I want to show you why Daniel doesn't own a rototiller and what he uses instead to break ground without ever turning the soil. I'll see you in the next one.